Joining me now, Rob Wittman, Congressman, Republican, 1st District, Virginia. That's the Central Virginia area. And he's also the chairman of the subcommittee on basically sea power readiness. And he's up for re-election in November. I think that's November 8th. Joining us now, happy Independence Day, Rob Wittman. Dr. Wittman, good to have you.
Happy Independence Day, John. Great to be with you.
Okay, let's get right to it. Scott Pruitt resigning yesterday. He was under fire. Just all kinds of shenanigans in this swamp. I called for him to resign months ago over this. Who would you like to see the president choose as his successor? Do you have anybody in mind?
I don't have anybody particularly in mind. I want to make sure that we have somebody in there, John, that has the right viewpoint in balancing the role of government in the environmental protection realm. And remember, I spent years as an environmental health specialist, and there is a role there. But I want to make sure too that it's within the context of how somebody, makes good decisions regarding things like the Chesapeake Bay, regarding our water quality, regarding the quality of our air. And I think that there's a need today to make sure that we are balancing what we do here in the United States with what's done around the world, as well as, how we do that in a thoughtful way. Sometimes the realm of environmental regulation, gets away from, the objective measures and the objective efforts that are necessary to balance both keeping the environment safe, cleaning the air, cleaning the water, and making sure, too, that we can do so within an economy that prospers. And I think those things are important because if you're going to have the revenues to sustain these efforts of being environmentally responsible, you have to have both. You have to have, good, thoughtful regulation and an economy that can support that. You can't have such an overburden of regulations, and we've seen this, that you literally stop the economic engine that provides the resources that makes this country the most environmentally responsible country in the world. So I think somebody that has that viewpoint, somebody that can come in and create that balance, I think is who the president should put into place. And I don't have a particular name in mind. I just have a philosophy in mind. And that's the philosophy I think that person needs to reflect to be effective in running the Environmental Protection Agency.
Do you think former Director Pruitt embodied what you just described?
Well, I think some of the areas he did, in some of the areas not as much. The one place where I don't think he reflected that, and that is, with his behavior.
Right.
You are in that position, placed in an area of very, very high trust. And if you are not going to live up to that trust by making sure that your behavior is beyond reproach, then, what's happening now with him resigning is probably the best place for the country and the best place for Administrator Pruitt, because, if you can't function at that level, if you can't act ethically, if you can't be beyond question in everything that you do, then it's probably better that we have somebody else in place that can garner that trust, because that position is extraordinarily important in relation to the things that need to be done and have to be done without somebody that's constantly living under the shadow of the questions of the integrity and the ethics and the full wherewithal of how somebody acts. I mean, to me, that's absolutely critical. So, I'm glad that Director Pruitt saw it in the best interest of the nation to move on, to allow the president to appoint somebody else. I think that's probably the proper way to go about it.
Well, look, you're right. I called for him to resign months ago. I broke with the White House on it, which I don't do all the time, but I thought his behavior was not reflective of what the president was trying to do as far as draining the swamp, and some of the things he said is inexcusable. And as you know, both you and I live. I mean, the first thing that was a flag for me, both you and I are in Washington. You go home. I can't always go home. So I have to stay there. And there are no rooms available in Washington, D.C. for $50 that you would put your dog in. All right. You just wouldn't do it. So they're not safe. You just wouldn't do it. So that was the first flag. And it kind of went on from there. So look, he just came in with an attitude. He had to go, and we'll see what happens. You're not part of the confirmation process in the House of Representatives. Do you have a choice for the president's pick for nominee for the Supremes?
John, no, I don't have a particular person in mind. I think the list of folks the president said he's going to pick from, I think all of those jurists have extensive experience, all making them qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. I think the president will have a very difficult decision. They're all very, very talented jurists. I think, though, the thing that he points to is critical in how he will go about the selection process. And, you know, he has said that he's looking for skill, knowledge, and ability in the judge that he selects. And I think that's absolutely right. You want to look at, you know, what's the full scope of what these individuals have done. You know, how are they as jurists? How are they? How are their thought patterns exhibited in what they've done, in both on the bench and how they reflect and conduct themselves? I think are all critical in looking at someone that you select as a judge. And I think the president's right. I don't think you go in and ask them questions about how they would rule. I think you look at, you know, how they operated. How are they as decision makers? You know, judges have to be very skilled decision makers. They have to show the ability to weigh all the different aspects of information that's before them, and they have to be able to put that into context to the greatest governing document ever created, and that is the Constitution. And how will they, in their judgment, carry out what the Constitution directs our government to be? Both Article 1, 2, and 3. How will they do that? How will they go about the thought process? You know, and how do they view the Constitution? I think all those things are critical for the president to look at when he decides who will be his nominee. And from all indications and everything that he said leading up to this, and you know he's doing those interviews over the next several days, and has done some, it's clear to me that that's how he's going to reflect on who he nominates. And I think that's exactly, you know, how he needs to go about this decision-making process. And it's deliberate, and he's looking again, you know, at the knowledge, skills, and abilities of these judges and how they will take their decision-making and place it within the context of our Constitution. That, to me, is what a judge is all about at any level, whether it's a judge at the state level applying the Virginia Constitution or whether it's a judge at the federal level applying the U.S. Constitution. I think the president gets it, and that's the way he's going to go about selection.
We're going to find out Monday. He says he'll announce it by 9 a.m. on Monday, July 9th, so a couple days here. Congressman Wittman, we're going to find out. We're with Congressman Rob Wittman. He's a Republican from the 1st District of Virginia. He chairs the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces. Congressman, I've got to ask you this question because this is really now becoming an issue with Republicans in Virginia. Are you going to campaign with Corey Stewart in this cycle?
Well, John, my focus is making sure that in the 1st District that I get reelected. And, you know, we have Republicans on the ticket in all these different districts, and I look forward to getting out on the campaign trail and making sure that I'm communicating with voters here in the 1st District and taking my case to them as to why I should go back. I know that Corey Stewart's working on his campaign, and I'm sure his campaign folks will contact ours. But my focus is 100% on making sure that I run my campaign and that I win my campaign.
If he were to call you up and ask if you would campaign with him side by side, Congressman Wittman, would you do that?
Well, again, our schedule is booked all the way through this campaign season. We would look and see what opportunities are out there. So, John, that's asking me to see what the time and scheduling would be. We will certainly listen to Mr. Stewart and his folks with their efforts. But again, my focus is 100% on our campaign and getting things done there. I can't speak on conjecture and what might or might not happen, because our schedule is pretty doggone full, and I'm going to remain committed to the things that I have told folks that I would do and the places that I said that I would be.
Do you have a choice for chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia?
No, I do not. I know that there are a number of people that have indicated an interest in running. I just want to make sure that we have somebody that's going to work tirelessly to make sure that we as a party are talking about the issues that are the foundation of our Republican creed, that we are bringing folks together across the state in our party, that we are bringing other folks into the party, because I think our message and the things that we stand for appeal to a number of folks out there. And I think we can do a great job, an even better job in communicating and bringing more folks into the party, and making sure, too, that we get folks out to support our candidates.
So, Congressman, my candidate, the guy that I think is the answer for the Republican Party of Virginia, not that there is one statewide, but the best one, is former governor, former presidential candidate Jim Gilmore, also ran for Senate, didn't do very well, but understands winning and losing. Won big, got beat big. If he were to emerge as a candidate, is that somebody who Rob Wittman could get behind?
Well, John, the key in selecting our state party chairman is the members of our fantastic county committees. And I'm going to turn to them and members of the state central and look to them as to them making the decision about who they want as their leader. It really doesn't, make a lot of difference about who I want. It's, to me, very, very important to listen to who the folks in the grassroots want. Who do they want as their leader? Who do they believe best serves moving our party forward? So I'm going to be looking to the great folks that serve on our state central committee, that serve on our congressional district committee, that serve on our legislative district committees, that serve on our Senate district committees, and look to them for their thoughts, advice, and counsel about who they would like to see. And as always in these things, I remain neutral, but I'm always interested to hear their perspective and what they want to see in leadership there, and that's who I'm going to look to as far as the selection process.
Dr. Wittman, you're part of leadership in the House of Representatives now, obviously, with your position as chairman of the important subcommittee. I think the Republicans are going to maintain control of the House. I predicted that. I think they're going to maintain it 3, maybe 5, maybe 8, something like that. If they do that, have you made a commitment to any candidate for Speaker, or are you in a position where you're going to keep an open mind?
No, I haven't committed to anybody. I'm looking at all the folks that have indicated that an interest in running for Speaker, and I've had conversations with all of them. So, I think it's going to be important to focus on winning these elections. I'm going to be looking at, not only what do those folks stand for, but, what are they doing to make sure that we hold a majority. I think that's an important part of this, too. The leadership is not just about, what happens there in Congress, but, what do you do to make sure that we maintain our majority. So, I'm having conversations with all of them. They've all been very, very open and communicative with me about what they have in mind, their vision of leadership, what they're doing right now to make sure that we hold a majority. So, I am uncommitted at this particular point and continuing to have those conversations with folks.
All right, Dr. Wittman, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you're not committed to someone. We'll see how it turns out. First of all, you have to win, and then everybody else has to win to maintain the majority. So we got a long way between now and then. I got a couple more minutes. I do want to get your take on, there's a movement now in the House of Representatives and on the Hill that the President Trump should not have the ability to unilaterally do tariffs. Now, as you know, complete disclosure, I'm a protectionist, so when these tariffs came down last night on China, to me, it's like Christmas Day. So I'm excited over it. But you've got a group of never Trumpers driven by the Goldman Sachs bunch, basically, that wants to do free trade. And I get the funding thing. I get the whole thing. But they're saying the president doesn't have the authority to do this, and they're trying to pass legislation in order to take that authority of trade authority away from the president. Are you part of that movement?
No, I think the president does have the authority to execute trade agreements, but I do believe that the Senate has a role too in trade agreements. So the question is whose efforts overlap the other? Does the president, in putting these tariffs in place, is that considered a senatorial constitutional authority, or is it the president's? And that's certainly one that's up for debate. Presidents in the past have taken these actions and clearly have asserted that authority. I think ultimately there's always a battle back and forth between the legislative and executive branches about where that authority exists. If there is a question, it would certainly be with the Senate as far as formal trade agreements like Trans-Pacific Partnership and those other efforts that have come before the Congress. But the ultimate determination about the tariffs, we've seen in the past where presidents have exerted their constitutional authority to do that.
Congressman Rob Wittman, we're out of time. I want to really thank you for joining us today. More information, go to whitman.house.gov, whitman.house.gov. Also, Congressman, people want to get involved in your campaign. What's your campaign website?
Sure. Campaign website is www.robwittman.com. That's Rob Wittman, WITTMAN.com. You can join us there, sign up. We'd love to have you out there helping us on the campaign trail.